My name is Serafina. I'm 32, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet water in a family of roaring fires. The observer, the listener, the one who smooths down ruffled feathers and absorbs conflict until it dissolves into the background of our lives. I'm a potter by trade, and perhaps that's why I understand the value of patience, of gentle pressure, of letting things take their own shape in their own time. But I also know that some clay is too brittle, and no amount of water can keep it from cracking under pressure. When my grandparents, Nana Maeve and Gramps Ronan, passed away and left their entire legacy to me, something fundamental shifted in my quiet world. The house on Whisperwind Point, their portfolio of modest but steady stocks, the savings they'd carefully built over 50 years, it all came to me, a sum totaling just over $750,000. It wasn't the money that changed me, but the weight of the trust it represented. In that moment, I stopped being just the quiet water and began to feel the solid earth beneath. I started listening with a new kind of attention, not to absorb, but to understand. And I began to plan, because I knew the true nature of the tides I was facing. My brother, Julian, is 3 years my junior. He is the sun around which my mother, Eleanor, has always orbited. Julian is a supernova of charm and ambition, a man who can sell you the sky and make you feel grateful for the privilege. He lives in a world of quick deals, dazzling smiles, and narratives he spins so skillfully that even he seems to believe them. His life has been a series of spectacular failures cushioned by our mother's unwavering belief that he was just one sure thing away from greatness. There were maxed-out credit cards in her name, a borrowed car sold to cover a gambling debt, and countless other messes, each one cleaned up with the weary sigh and open checkbook of a mother convinced of her son's misunderstood genius. I was the opposite. I was the bedrock, the reliable one, the emergency fund of emotional and, occasionally, financial support. I was the one expected to be sensible, to have my life in order, to be the unshakable foundation upon which Julian could build his castles in the air. For a long time, I accepted that role. I loved my family, and I mistook my compliance for a form of love. I was done with that mistake. When Gramps passed 2 years ago, a year after Nana Maeve, he left the estate solely to me. I wasn't shocked. In their final years, when the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of their beloved home, I was the one who was there. I was the one who drove them to the endless litany of doctor's appointments, who navigated the labyrinthine world of prescriptions and insurance claims, who sat with them in the quiet evenings, listening to stories of a life well lived. I was the one who learned the rhythms of their garden, the names of the birds that visited the feeders, the precise way Nana Maeve liked her tea. Julian would appear like a comet on major holidays, trailing charisma and expensive cologne. He'd charm them for an hour, take a flurry of photos for his social media feed, #FamilyFirst, #MakingMemories, and then vanish back into his own bright, busy universe. But when the solicitor read the will and my name was the only one spoken, I saw the look on my mother's face. It wasn't just surprise. It was a cold, sharp disappointment, a tightening of her lips that said I had somehow usurped a throne that was not mine to claim. In her eyes, I had taken something. In that silent, sterile office, I felt the first shift in the atmospheric pressure. A storm was gathering just over the horizon. The heart of the inheritance was the house. It wasn't a grand mansion, but a weathered cedar-shingled home perched on a sliver of land called Whisperwind Point. It had wide, generous windows that looked out over the churning gray-blue of the Atlantic, and a garden that Nana Maeve had tended for half a century, a riot of stubborn sea roses, hydrangeas, and fragrant lavender. The salt-laced wind had softened its edges, and the scent of old wood, beeswax, and the sea was embedded in its very bones. It was more than a property. It was a sanctuary, a living archive of my family's history, and it was now my responsibility to protect it. I didn't move in right away. I stayed in my small apartment in the quieter, artsier part of the city, a place filled with the earthy scent of clay and the hum of my kiln. I needed the distance to think. Quietly, methodically, I began to build a fortress. I met with an estate lawyer, a woman named Helena Croft, whose calm, discerning eyes seemed to see right through to the heart of things. On her advice, I didn't just put my name on the deed. We created the Whisperwind Point Trust, an irrevocable entity that became the legal owner of everything: the house, the stocks, the savings. I was the trustee, the manager, but the assets themselves were shielded, held within a legal structure that was separate from me as an individual. I had the original deed, the trust documents, and all related paperwork stored in a secure deposit box. I even transferred the utilities and property taxes into the name of a holding company tied to the trust. It was a complex, expensive process, but every fee felt like an investment in my future peace. I didn't tell a soul. Not Julian. Not Eleanor. I let them assume I was the same naive, agreeable Serafina they had always known. I let them believe the house was a prize, sitting there, vulnerable and waiting to be claimed. For a few months, an unsettling calm descended. Julian sent a few breezy texts asking if he could borrow the keys to the beach house for a weekend with friends. The house is on a cliff. There is no beach. My mother would call and weave melancholy observations into our conversations. It's such a shame, she'd sigh. Your grandparents weren't thinking clearly at the end. It's not fair to put that much responsibility on one person. She once said, with a voice full of false nostalgia, you know, your grandfather always saw a spark of himself in Julian. As if that somehow invalidated his final, written wishes. I would just hum in agreement or change the subject. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct their assumptions. I let them underestimate me. It was a strategy Gramps had taught me, sitting on the porch swing, watching the gulls. Watch the tides, Serafina, he'd say, not just the waves. The waves are loud and they crash, and they get all the attention. But the tide is the real power. It moves slowly, quietly, but it changes everything. I was watching the tide. The tension finally broke on a crisp Saturday last month. The air was clear and smelled of salt and late-blooming roses. I was at the house, my hands deep in the soil of Nana Maeve's garden, trying to coax life back into a neglected patch of herbs. I looked up to see my mother's silver sedan crunching up the gravel driveway. Julian leaped out of the passenger seat, radiating a blinding confidence, his designer sunglasses glinting in the sun. He looked like an actor arriving on set. My mother followed, a clipboard held against her chest, her smile bright and brittle, the kind reserved for public triumphs. Serafina, darling, Julian called out, striding toward me and clapping a hand on my shoulder, leaving a smudge of dirt on his pristine white shirt. He didn't seem to notice. We have some amazing news. I straightened up, wiping my earthy hands on my jeans, and raised an eyebrow. My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on a tone of gentle, benevolent authority. We've been speaking with a legal advisor, Serafina. It seems there was a significant oversight. The will wasn't properly updated after your grandmother passed. Legally, the house should have passed to both of you. But don't you worry your pretty little head about it. We've taken care of everything. My heart didn't pound. My breath didn't catch. A strange, profound stillness settled over me. Taken care of what, exactly? Julian, with a theatrical flourish, pulled a folded document from the back pocket of his artfully distressed jeans. He waved it like a victory flag. We had the title transferred into my name. It's all official. The paperwork's filed. We're going to need you to clear out your things by next Friday, but hey, no hard feelings, right? We'll even help you pack. I looked from his triumphant, grinning face to my mother's serene, confident one. I saw their shared vision, their absolute certainty that they had won, that I was nothing more than a temporary obstacle easily swept aside. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all was almost beautiful in its purity. I felt a laugh bubble up, but I held it down, transforming it into a small, quiet smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. The kind of smile that makes people deeply uneasy. You really think, I said, my voice soft, that I would just let that happen? Julian laughed, a loud, dismissive bark. Oh, Serafina. It's already happening. You've been living in your little pottery and daydreams world for too long. This is the real world. My mother stepped in, her voice softening into a familiar, manipulative balm. We aren't trying to be cruel, dear. It's just what's best. Julian has plans. He can manage the property, perhaps flip it. You have your own little apartment. This way, everyone gets what they need. It's a win-win. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list all the ways she was wrong. I just held their gaze, letting the silence stretch, and then I nodded slowly. All right, I said. I understand. 2 days later, they returned. This time, they brought a moving truck. I had been waiting for them. The truck rumbled up the driveway, its diesel engine a vulgar intrusion on the morning's peace. Julian was in the passenger seat, sipping a latte from a paper cup, and my mother was already out on the gravel, directing the 2 hired movers toward the front porch with imperious waves of her hand. But then they saw me. I was standing on the porch, my arms crossed over my chest. The morning light was behind me, casting me in silhouette. Beside me stood a tall, silver-haired man in a meticulously tailored charcoal suit. He was holding a handsome leather portfolio, and a discreet, official-looking badge was clipped to his inner jacket pocket, which he had left open just enough for it to be visible. The portfolio was embossed with the name of a law firm they wouldn't recognize. The badge was very real. And the man, Mr. Sterling Hayes, was a senior paralegal from my lawyer's office, specializing in property law and, as it happened, fraud. They stopped dead. The movers, halfway to the porch, froze, looking from my family to us, a tangible sense of confusion and alarm on their faces. Julian was the first to recover, his bravado faltering. He slid out of the truck, his sunglasses failing to hide the sudden uncertainty in his eyes. What's going on here? I remained silent. I let Mr. Hayes take the stage. He cleared his throat, a small, crisp sound that cut through the air. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, measured, and carried the unshakable weight of absolute authority. Are you Mr. Julian Moreau? He asked, his gaze fixed on my brother. Julian frowned, thrown off balance. Yeah. Who are you? Mr. Hayes took one deliberate step forward. My name is Sterling Hayes. I am here representing the trustee of the Whisperwind Point Trust, which is the sole legal owner of this property. He gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward the house behind us. I have here a certified copy of the deed, which has been held in this trust since March of last year, under the exclusive management of Ms. Serafina Moreau. Any subsequent claims or attempts to transfer the title, particularly one based on a fraudulent application, are not only legally invalid, but constitute a criminal offense. The color drained from Julian's face. Fraudulent, he stammered, his eyes darting toward our mother. What is he talking about? Eleanor stepped forward, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. There must be some mistake. We had a lawyer look at the old deed. It was still in Ronan's name. We just assumed. You assumed wrong, I said, my voice finally finding its edge. It was as clear and cool as the morning air. I never left the estate vulnerable. It's owned by a legal trust, not by me personally. That's why you couldn't find it in the public records. You went to some cut-rate title company online and paid them to rubber stamp a fake transfer using an obsolete document. Mr. Hayes nodded grimly. My firm has already filed a fraud alert with the county registrar's office regarding the attempted title claim. Ordinarily, a warning letter would be the first step. However, given the aggressive nature of your actions, arriving with a moving crew, issuing an eviction notice to the legal trustee, we have advised our client to proceed directly to formal enforcement. Julian blinked, his mind clearly struggling to catch up. Enforcement. I turned my body slightly to face him, letting the full weight of my meaning land. It means, I said, spelling it out for him, that if you set foot on this property again without my explicit, written permission, you will be arrested for trespassing. And if you or anyone acting on your behalf attempts to interfere with the trust or its assets again, you will be facing multiple felony charges. Is that clear enough for you? For a long, humming moment, the only sound was the distant cry of a gull and the nervous shuffling of the movers' feet on the gravel. One of them coughed, then turned and began walking slowly back toward the safety of the truck. Julian finally found his voice, sputtering with an indignation that was both pathetic and predictable. You're seriously doing this? To your own family? My voice was quiet, but it was no longer the quiet of water. It was the quiet of stone. Family? You showed up here with a forged document and a moving truck to throw me out of my home. The one place Nana and Gramps wanted me to have, the place I cared for them in when you were too busy to call. Don't you dare talk to me about family. Eleanor's jaw was tight with fury. He was confused, Serafina. He didn't understand the legalities. No, I said, cutting her off with a sharpness that made her flinch. You didn't understand. You thought I was still the same pliable girl I was 10 years ago. The girl you could guilt-trip into dropping her plans to fix Julian's latest disaster. The one who would lend him money she couldn't spare because you just needed her to this one last time. I'm not that girl anymore. I learned. I listened. And I prepared. Mr. Hayes added, his tone dispassionate, and just so we are all perfectly clear, we have also notified the local sheriff's department. Should either of you return to this property with any claim of ownership, a file is already waiting for them. It outlines both the civil and criminal statutes you have violated. Julian's eyes burned with a helpless rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He spun around and snapped at the movers, who were now hastily getting back into their truck. Let's go. We're leaving. He didn't look at me again. My mother lingered for a heartbeat, her mouth slightly agape, as if searching for one last lever of manipulation, one final appeal to a sense of duty that no longer existed. But the words wouldn't come. Defeated, she turned and followed her son to the car. I watched the silver sedan pull out of the driveway, spitting gravel, and disappear down the winding coastal road. The quiet that descended in its wake was heavy, thick with the residue of a battle that had been brewing for decades. Mr. Hayes handed me a copy of the official report. Call Ms. Croft if they make any further contact, he said simply. I thanked him, and after he left, I remained on the porch for a long time. This was the same porch where I used to sit with Gramps, listening to him talk about knowing your own strength. People will always try to tell you who you are, Serafina, he'd said once, his hand warm on mine. Don't you ever let them. You know your own heart. You tend to it like a garden. He was right. I had watched the tide turn. And for the first time, I hadn't been swept away by it. I had stood my ground. But the tide, I would soon learn, had not fully receded. 3 days later, a crisp envelope arrived by courier. It contained a formal letter, printed on expensive, cream-colored letterhead from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was from my mother. In it, she claimed to be suffering from severe, emotional distress and familial alienation. She argued that, as a direct descendant, she possessed a moral and familial right to a significant portion of the estate. She was demanding compensation for the mental anguish I had caused by excluding her and Julian. Attached was an itemized list of what she considered to be fair and reasonable reparations: $200,000 in cash, a co-ownership stake in the Whisperwind Point house, and a modest monthly stipend to be paid from the estate, effective immediately. I set the letter down on the old oak table in the kitchen. For a full minute, I felt nothing, just a strange, hollow buzzing in my ears. Then, a tremor started in my hands, a deep, slow-building heat that rose up from my chest. It wasn't fear. It was a pure, cold, clarifying rage. She hadn't surrendered. She had just changed her method of attack. And in that moment, I knew. Neither had I. I must have read that letter a dozen times, sitting in the sun-drenched kitchen of the house they were trying to take from me. Each reading peeled back another layer of my own denial. At first, I searched for a hidden meaning, a sign that this was a desperate, misguided cry for help rather than a calculated act of aggression. But by the final reading, the words on the thick, creamy paper were stark and unambiguous. My mother had hired a lawyer to bill me for the pain of not being allowed to take what was mine. It was the language that cut the deepest. Phrases like breach of filial duty and moral inheritance were weaponized against me. The demand for $200,000 was almost secondary to the breathtaking arrogance of framing her greed as a wound I had inflicted upon her. She was the victim. I, the quiet one, the carer, the keeper of memories, was the villain who had hoarded the family treasures. I didn't react in the heat of the moment. Years of absorbing my family's emotional storms had taught me the danger of impulsive responses. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Helena Croft. I forwarded her the letter, along with everything else I had documented, the texts from Julian, the screenshots of his vague, boastful social media posts, my own detailed notes of their visit. Helena was a port in the storm. Her voice was always calm, but there was a current of steel beneath it. "This is predictable, Serafina," she said after reviewing the document. "When a direct assault fails, they pivot to a narrative of grievance. It's a common tactic in estate disputes. They're trying to bully you into a settlement to make the problem go away. We won't be doing that." Within 24 hours, Helena had drafted and sent a formal cease and desist letter to my mother's new attorney. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, stating unequivocally that the Whisperwind Point Trust was legally impenetrable, that my mother had no standing, and that any further attempts to litigate this would be met with a countersuit for harassment and frivolous litigation. But Helena didn't just play defense. She had her own investigator look into the fraudulent title transfer. The findings were worse than I'd imagined. Julian hadn't just filled out a form online. He had forged my grandfather's signature badly on a quitclaim deed. He had used a counterfeit notary stamp he'd purchased from a shady website, and he had filed the documents through an out-of-state online registry known for its lax verification, hoping the jurisdictional mess would obscure his actions. "He didn't just try to trick you, Serafina," Helena explained, her voice grave. "He committed multiple felonies. Forgery, filing a false instrument, wire fraud. The district attorney's office is already investigating this registry for other cases. Your brother just made himself a very easy target for them." I still held back, telling myself I didn't want to be the one to bring the full weight of the law down on him. I let them make the next move. And they did. 2 weeks passed. Then another letter arrived, this one not from a lawyer. It was from my mother, directly. Typed, but her voice screamed from the page in a torrent of passive aggression and wounded pride. "After everything I have sacrificed for you children, I always worried you were too solitary, too wrapped up in your own little world. I raised you to have a kinder heart than this." It ended with a final, manipulative plea. "You have the power to end all this pain, Serafina. Families should be able to resolve these things with love, not with lawyers." I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Love, to her, was a synonym for my capitulation. I didn't reply. As Helena advised, I simply scanned the letter and added it to the burgeoning digital file, evidence of a clear pattern of harassment. Then came the final, petty escalation. One morning, I went in my apartment's mailbox and found a folded piece of paper wedged in the slit. It wasn't in an envelope. It was a flyer for Julian's real estate company, Apex Urban Ventures. On the back, in his unmistakable, arrogant scrawl, were the words, "Hope you're enjoying your castle. Remember who you have to thank for the family name that got you there." I actually laughed. A short, tired, humorless sound. He was still trying to claim credit for a legacy he had actively tried to desecrate. I took the flyer, scanned it, and sent it to Helena. But as I did, a cold resolve settled in my heart. This was no longer about defending my inheritance. It was about defending my peace, my character, my future. They would not stop until they were made to stop. Julian's job at Apex Urban Ventures was his latest prize. It was a boutique firm that sold an image of slick, modern success. Their website was a glossy monument to ethical transactions and client-first integrity. I wondered how they would feel about employing a man who used forged documents to try and steal a house from his own sister. But before I could decide what to do with that information, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was my cousin, Iris. She'd always been the most grounded of my relatives, a quiet observer like me. Her text was simple. "Serafina, can we talk? Your mom has been making some calls. I think you need to know what she's saying." We met for coffee the next day at a small cafe far from my neighborhood. Iris looked worried. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of texts from a family group chat, one my mother had created without including me. The story my mother was weaving was vile. According to her, I had taken advantage of my grandparents and their dotage. I had subtly poisoned them against Julian and her, manipulating a frail and confused old man into changing his will. She painted a picture of me as a cold, calculating opportunist, preying on the vulnerability of the elderly. She even hinted at financial impropriety, suggesting I had been siphoning their funds long before Gramps passed. It was a campaign of character assassination, designed to isolate me and turn the entire family against me. A sickening, icy dread filled my stomach. It was no longer about the house or the money. This was about power. My mother could not tolerate my independence. My quiet no was an act of rebellion she could not forgive, and so she had decided to burn my reputation to the ground to force me back into submission. Iris looked at me, her eyes full of sympathy. I don't believe a word of it, Serafina. Neither does my brother. But she's being very convincing. She's crying on the phone to Aunt Beatrice. She's telling everyone who will listen. She's not going to stop. I nodded slowly, the coffee cup warm between my cold hands. Thank you for telling me, Iris. It means more than you know. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark, listening to the distant city sounds, and I understood. If my mother was willing to destroy my name and my relationship with our entire family, if she was willing to desecrate the memory of my grandparents with such vicious lies, then I had to be willing to see this through to its absolute end. This was no longer a defense. It was a reclamation. Not just of my inheritance, but of my truth. And what I did next would not be resolved by lawyers alone. I spent the next 48 hours in the quiet solitude of my studio, not at my potter's wheel, but at my desk. The legal fortress Helena had built around the trust was secure. But my mother's war was now being fought on a different front, the court of family opinion. Iris's warning had been a gift, but the poison was already spreading. I was getting hesitant, awkward texts from aunts and uncles. Just checking in, and heard there's some family trouble, hope you're okay. They were testing the waters, unsure what to believe. Eleanor's strategy was clear: isolate me, paint me as a monster, and then leverage the family's collective discomfort to pressure me into a reconciliation, which meant giving her and Julian what they wanted for the sake of peace. It was a trap laid with years of carefully cultivated guilt and obligation. I had no intention of walking into it. So I decided to burn it down with the simple, searing light of truth. With Helena's help, I compiled a comprehensive dossier. It wasn't an emotional plea, it was a statement of irrefutable facts. We assembled everything: a copy of the fraudulent quitclaim deed Julian had filed, with the forgery of Gramps' signature circled in red, a report from a forensic document examiner confirming the signature was fake and the notary stamp counterfeit, copies of the threatening letters from my mother and her lawyer, with the demand for $200,000 highlighted, screenshots of the family group chat Iris had sent me, showing my mother's calculated smear campaign in her own words, and finally, a copy of the official fraud alert filed with the county registrar. I drafted a short, carefully worded cover letter. It read, "Dear family, I know that many of you have recently heard some distressing things about me and about my grandparents' estate. I have remained silent out of a hope that this private matter could be resolved, but it has become clear that my silence is being used to spread a false and deeply hurtful narrative. Before you form an opinion, I wanted you to have the facts. Not stories, not rumors, but documented proof. I have attached a file containing all the relevant legal documents and correspondence. I am not asking you to take my side, only to look at the evidence and draw your own conclusions based on the truth. After this, I will not be discussing the matter further. My relationship with each of you will depend on your ability to respect that boundary." I created a PDF of the entire dossier, attached it to the email, and sent it to 27 relatives. Then I turned off my phone. The silence lasted for about 3 hours. When I turned my phone back on, it was flooded. There were a dozen messages. Most were from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, their words a mixture of shock, horror, and shame. My Aunt Beatrice, my mother's own sister who had always doted on Julian, called me, sobbing. "Serafina, I am so sorry," she wept. "Your mother, she told us you'd coerced him. She made it sound so convincing. To see it in black and white, that forged signature. I had no idea. I am ashamed I ever doubted you. I didn't ask for apologies. I just said, quietly, I hope you understand now why I had to protect myself." Of course, not everyone was convinced. A few cousins on my mother's side accused me of airing dirty laundry and escalating the situation. One even claimed the documents could have been faked. I expected that. You can't force people to see a truth they aren't willing to accept. But for every one of them, there were 5 others who reached out with quiet messages of support, thanking me for my courage. I had broken the narrative. The next step was harder. I sat with the information about Julian's job for a full day. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about public trust. He was in a position where people entrusted him with their largest financial assets. He had proven he was not worthy of that trust. I composed another email, this time anonymous. I sent it to the General Ethics and Compliance address, listed on the Apex Urban Ventures website. The subject line was simple: formal complaint regarding an agent. In it, I attached the same dossier, stripped of the more personal family correspondence, but including all the evidence of the property fraud. I laid out the facts dispassionately, that one of their agents had used forged documents in an attempt to fraudulently seize a real estate asset valued at nearly $1 million. I mentioned the pending investigation by the DA's office into the fraudulent registry he used. I ended by stating that I was a concerned citizen who believed in the firm's stated commitment to ethical practices. I thought it might take weeks for anything to happen. It took less than 48 hours. On Wednesday, Julian's smiling face was on Our Team page. By Friday afternoon, his profile was gone. His name had been scrubbed from the website entirely. A friend of a friend who worked in the industry later told me the firm had launched an immediate internal investigation, and what they found in his files went beyond my complaint. He wasn't just fired. The firm, to protect itself, had self-reported his actions to the state's real estate licensing board. His license was suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. He tried to call me that night, 15 times. Each call sent a jolt of anxiety through me, but I didn't answer. The next day, a single post appeared on his Instagram page. It was a black square with white text: "Be careful who you trust. Even salt looks like sugar." He couldn't bring himself to name me, but it didn't matter. The people whose opinions I cared about already knew the truth. The final piece fell into place a week later. A formal notice arrived in my mail, a copy of a document filed with the court. A warrant had been issued for Julian's arrest on charges of property fraud and forgery. I held the paper in my hands, the official seal of the county at the top, and felt no victory. This wasn't a triumph, it was a tragedy. I had never wanted to destroy him. I had only wanted to be left alone. I had only wanted to honor the trust my grandparents had placed in me. But his actions, and my mother's, had set a series of consequences in motion that were now beyond anyone's control. He was arraigned quietly. No media circus, just a procedural court appearance, a public defender he couldn't afford to replace, and the start of a long, humiliating legal battle. He likely wouldn't see jail time for a first offense, but the conviction would shadow him for the rest of his life. The charismatic salesman would forever be branded a fraud. As for my mother, the public exposure of the evidence was a blow from which her narrative could not recover. She went completely, utterly silent. No calls, no letters, no flying monkeys sent on her behalf. 2 months went by in this deafening quiet. Then, one last letter arrived. It was from her lawyer. The note was brief and glacial. It stated that Eleanor Moreau was formally withdrawing all present and future claims regarding the estate of Ronan and Maeve Moreau, and respectfully requested that all communication cease. She had surrendered. She knew she had lost, not just the house, but the moral high ground she had so desperately tried to occupy. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I felt a quiet release. Like a muscle that had been clenched for 30 years had finally been allowed to relax. That evening, I drove out to Whisperwind Point. I left my shoes on the porch and walked through the house, my bare feet cool against the worn hardwood floors. The air smelled of cedar, salt, and the faint, sweet perfume of the last of Nana Maeve's roses blooming outside the window. The house was mine. It was safe. I stood in the living room, in the exact spot where Gramps used to sit in his deep leather armchair, and I looked out at the endless gray horizon of the sea. I kept it safe, I whispered to the quiet rooms. Just like I promised. In the end, I didn't just save the house. I saved myself. Julian lost a career built on illusions. My mother lost the story she told herself about her family and her role in it. And I found a strength I never knew I had, the strength to draw a line in the sand, to protect my peace, to honor my own truth. For the first time in my life, I was not the quiet water, reflecting the turmoil of others. I was the solid, unshakable earth beneath it. I was home,